So, pag-uusapan natin yung about sa ROTC. Okay, usap-usapan ngayon kasi yung ROTC eh. Pero bago yon, binabati ko muna si yung Corps Commander namin, si Franklin. Okay? So, ano yan, sa Palawan State University. Ayun, commander namin yan. So, yun nga, pag-usapan natin yung sa ROTC. Okay? Day 47 na move on. Okay? So, sige, nood lang kayo ha. Trying to reconnect tayo. Trying to reconnect. Okay, yan. So, yan, nakakonect ulit tayo, no? Umpisahan ko ulit. I'm Michael Asoy, one of the worst person in terms of work. So, pag-usapan natin yung usap-usapan ngayon yung ROTC. Pero bago yun, binabati ko muna yung Corps Commander namin, si Franklin, sa Palawan State University. Okay? So, yung ROTC, ano to eh, ano ba yun? Si Mayor Lim, yan, si Alfredo Lim, yung sponsored Senate Bill 2224. And Representative Eduardo Gullias, sponsored House Bill 5460, seeking to make ROTC again mandatory. So, yun, gusto nila ibalik yon. Tapos, nung bandang 2013 kasi, yung Department of National Defense Secretary Voltaire Gasmin aired a proposal to make ROTC once again mandatory for college students. A move ardently being protested by progressive youth groups such as Anak Bayan. There have also been reports of schools offering merchant marine courses that want to retain the ROTC program as mandatory, arguing that maritime companies prefer mariners with ROTC training. Okay, nanonood si Christine Blanco. Yan. Members of the House of Representatives of the 16th Congress of the Philippines have filed at least 6 House bills related to the ROTC program. Congressman Francis Abaya, Rodolfo Biason, yung mga sundalo yan, Erico Agmento, si Sherwin Gatchalian, saka si Manny Pacquiao, have proposed reinstating the mandatory nature of ROTC training, while Kabataan Party List Representative Terry Ridon has proposed the outright abolishment of the program. Okay, nagbabanggaan yung dalawang yan. Kailangan talaga ng ROTC ngayon. Okay? So, nung last year, si President Rodrigo Duterte approved the proposal to revive the mandatory nature of ROTC training for senior high school students in both public and private schools. Duterte certified the proposal as urgent and forwarded it to the Congress and Senate. Okay, nanonood si Mitch Gabriel. The ROTC program of the Philippines was for many decades a compelling aspect affecting the lives of male youths, okay, especially those who went in pursuit of college education. It was also a significant contributor to the officer corps of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. Yan yung tinuro sa akin ni Corps Commander ko na si Franklin. So yun, as of 2008, ROTC graduates of the officer candidate schools of the various services constituted roughly 75% of the AFP officer corps. Okay? The rest come from the ranks of the Philippine Military Academy. Among the more prominent graduates of the Philippine ROTC program are General Alfredo M. Santos, Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines from 1962 to 1965. And the first 4-star, si General of the AFP, General Rigoberto Atienza, 9th Chief of Staff of the AFP, and for whom Camp Atienza in Quezon City is named, and General Romeo C. Espino, the longest serving AFP Chief of Staff who served from basta mga ganun na. So, General Santos was a civil engineering graduate of Mapua Institute of Technology and was the Corps Commander of the Mapua Institute of the Technology Reserve Officers. So yun, Training Corps, General Atienza, a civil engineering graduate of the University of the Philippines, and General Espino, an agriculture graduate of University of the Philippines, Los Baños. So another notable ROTC graduate was General Fabian Ver, yung ni Marcos, AFP Chief of Staff under Ferdinand Marcos yun, and Director General of the National Intelligence and Security Authority. Yung kumakalat na video na parang inutusan ni Marcos si Ver na wag bombahin yung mga tao sa EDSA. So at present, ROTC is no longer a mandatory program for college students but an optional program component of the NSTP. The ROTC program accepts both male and female cadets. According to the latest available data natin, there has been a significant reduction in the number of students enrolling in ROTC from more than 800,000 enrolled cadets during the 1999 to 2000 school year. ROTC enrollment has dropped to 150,000. So yun, dami kasi pinagbawal nga as of 2011. During the first quarter of 2011, 500 colleges and universities were participating in the ROTC program. This is a sharp decline from the 200,000 schools offering ROTC before the National Service Training Program was enforced, yung NSTP. Okay, according to the Commission on Higher Education, yung ROTC component of NSTP has produced 1 million graduates over a 10-year period from 2000 to 2012. In comparison, the CWTS and LTS components of NSTP has produced 8 million and 538,000 graduates respectively. So yun, yung a period of discontent over ROTC's conduct and corruption that often plague its individual units had long been fermenting prior to 2000. Filipino student websites often contain short essays regarding the alleged pointlessness of the program. Student groups would occasionally include ROTC in their roster of grievances, whereas lawmakers would introduce resolutions intended to abolish ROTC. Okay, nanonood si McLaren sa si Russell Allen. Into this national mood of resentment fell tragedy that would have a significant impact on the Philippine ROTC program. Si Mark Chua, a student of the University of UST, okay, and a member of the UST ROTC unit, was found dead, his body floating in the Pasig River on 2001. Prior to his death, he and another student had reported an account of alleged corruption within the UST ROTC and to the school student publication. The National Bureau of Investigation, o NBI na tinatawag natin, would later conclude that members of the UST ROTC unit were responsible for Chuwa's death. One of the subjects would be sentenced to death 3 years later. Okay? So yun, the incident set off an explosion of anti-ROTC sentiment as students associations, school administrators, and other cause-oriented groups focus on protest and parliamentary approaches to the matter. The Congress of the Philippines took up the legal challenge, generating no less than 17 bills and resolutions in both houses of Congress in response to the clamor. Many of the bills mentioned Mark Chua in the text, acknowledging his death as the catalyst for reform. So yun, nagkaroon ng reform yung Republic Act 9163. Okay, nanonood si Armando Kulot Garcia, ayan si Kuya sa Bataan. So yung Republic Act 9163, otherwise known as the National Service Training Program Act of 2001, was Congress' answer to the clamor for change in the ROTC program. It was promulgated by the 12th Congress to the Philippines on January 2002. So minalas ako kasi nung college na ako, wala nang ROTC, NSTP na lang. So under the NSTP program, both male and female college students of any degree course or technical vocational course in public or private educational institutions are obliged to undergo one of three program components. Para pipili ka dyan sa college, pipili ka kung ano pipili mo sa NSTP. One of which is ROTC for an academic period of 2 semesters. However, ROTC as prerequisite lang yun for graduation was rescinded. Okay? So ROTC in the Philippines began in 1912. Yan, nanonood si Armando. When the Philippine Constabulary commenced with military instruction at the University of the Philippines, the University Board of Regents then made representations to the United States Department of War through the Governor General and received the services of the United States Army officer who took on the duties of a professor of military science. Through this arrangement, the first official ROTC unit in the Philippines was established sa UP noong 1922. Yan, nanonood si Joseph Matthews, Sir Joseph. So noong 1921, National University became the first private college in the Philippines to have an ROTC unit. Later in the same year, ano naman, Ateneo sa yung Colegio de San Juan de Letran soon followed and organized their own respective ROTC units. Tapos nung mga bandang 1936, the office of the Superintendent for ROTC units under the Philippine Army was activated to supervise all ROTC units in the country. So yun, naalala ko si yung President Manuel L. Quezon issued Executive Order number 207 noong 1939 in order to implement the National Defense Act of 1935, otherwise known as Commonwealth Act number 1. The embodiment of the National Defense Plan promulgated by General Douglas MacArthur for the Philippine Commonwealth. This executive order made ROTC obligatory at all colleges and universities with a total of enrollment of 100 students and greater. Okay, this measure was made in order to help fill out the reserve force requirement of 400,000 men by 1946, and especially for junior reserve officers. So malas ko nga sa panahon ko kasi wala nang ROTC noon eh. At nung World War II, okay, sa history natin, at the onset of World War II in 1941 until 1944, kay Hitler to eh, 33 colleges and universities in the Philippines had organized ROTC units. The cadets and officers of which would see action for the first time, elements from different ROTC units in Metro Manila took part in the Battle of Bataan. ROTC cadets of Silliman University in the Visayas made up 45% of the length of the strength of the 75th Infantry Regiment of the United States Army Forces in the Far East. Okay? So yun, yung volunteers from the Philippine Military Academy and various other ROTC units formed the Hunters ROTC Guerrilla Group. Wait lang, Jerica, si Jerica, which took part in the resistance movement during the Japanese occupation after the last American and Filipino forces had surrendered. Okay? So yun, nung mga bandang 1946 after ng World War II, Philippine Army Headquarters reactivated the pre-war ROTC units. The Philippine Army became the Armed Forces of the Philippines on December 1950, at which time the Philippines was divided into 4 military areas, and ROTC units operating within these areas fell under the supervision of their respective area commanders. So yun, nung si Ferdinand Marcos presented Executive Order number 207 of 1939, promulgated Executive Order number 59. In its place, this Executive Order made ROTC mandatory at all colleges, universities, and other institutions. Sa Technological Institute of the Philippines, wala niyan eh, with an enrollment of 250 male students and greater. Sabi ni parang si Marcos kasi also issued presidential decree, otherwise known as the National Service Law, noong 1980. It made national service obligatory for all Filipino citizens, specified 3 categories of national service: civic welfare service, law enforcement service, and military service. Kasi baka mangyari na naman yung World War, di ba, wala tayong sundalo. So yun, otherwise known as the Citizen Armed Forces of the Philippines Reservist Act, was enacted by the 8th Congress of the Philippines noong June 27. At the Reservist Act provided for organization, training, and utilization of reservists, referred to in the Act as citizen soldiers. Yan. The primary school of manpower for the reservist organization are graduates of the ROTC basic and advanced courses. So yun, Commonwealth Act number 1, the National Defense Act of 1935, referred to the ROTC as the Reserve Officers Training Corps, whereas Republic Act number 7077, the Citizen Armed Forces of the Philippines Reservist Act of 1991, referred to the ROTC as the Reserve Officers Training Corps, ascribing the possessive form to the word officers. Republic Act number 9163, the National Service Training Program Act of 2001 likewise uses the same possessive form as RA 7077. Yan, nabubulol ako. Si Ella Celestre na nanonood. So, pag reserve officers ka, Training Corps ROTC in the Philippines is one of 3 components of the National Service Training Program. The Civic Education and Defense Preparedness Program for Filipino college student. ROTC aims to provide military education and training for students to mobilize them for national defense preparedness. Its specific objectives include preparation of college students for service in the armed forces of the Philippines in the event of an emergency, and their training to become reservists and potential commissioned officers of the AFP. Okay, graduates of the ROTC advanced program served in all branches of the armed forces of the Philippines in 2008. ROTC graduates of the officer candidate schools of the various services constituted roughly 75% of the AFP officers corps. So yun, ang ROTC grants qualified student cadet scholarship benefits through a si Diana Navarro. Yan. Through a merit-based incentive program in return for an obligation of military service in the reserve force or active duty in the AFP if given the opportunity after graduation. ROTC student or cadets attend college like other students but also receive basic military training and officer training from the branch of service that handles their school's ROTC unit. The students participate in regular ROTC instruction during the school year. 1 year yun for basic ROTC student cadets and 3 school years for advanced ROTC cadet officers. And extended training activities during the summer such as ROTC summer camp training and the advanced ROTC academic PACE training, yung tinatawag na ARAP-T. Okay? So yun, ROTC units in colleges and universities are organized through the Department of Military Science and Tactics. Wala na yun which is under joint supervision by the school administration and the Department of National Defense. Yung hawak ngayon ni Secretary Lorenzana. These ROTC units are in turn managed by active duty officers of the AFP and the reservist organization, representatives of the major services, the Philippine Army Reserve Command of the Philippine Army, tapos the Philippine Navy Reserve Command of the Philippine Navy, and the Philippine Air Force Reserve Command of the Philippine Air Force. Yan, ano si ECA. So yun, kung napanood nyo yung about sa ROTC, thank you and see you tomorrow. That's all for now. It's me again, Michael Asoy, one of the worst person in the shower. Peace out.